I begin. All right, welcome everyone and happy new year. I'm so excited that each of you were available to join us for our winter Lunch and Learn series. Just to give you a heads up, we typically do 3 Lunch and Learns per year, 1 per quarter, taking the summer off. But this year we made the decision to focus each of our Lunch and Learns on the 4 sections of the Race to Equity Rock County report. So we will be having 4 Lunch and Learns this year, 1 per season. So very excited. Today we're going to dig into education. We'll begin with a brief presentation, and because all of us either indirectly or directly have been impacted by COVID, and our educational systems are no exception, unfortunately, I am so excited that we are going to end the presentation with some words from the director of NAMI Rock County, who is going to center her comments on youth-centered activities that they're engaged in. We did reach out to each of the Rock County superintendents, and I'm so excited that a few of them did register. So before I open the discussion portion of our afternoon, I will allow space for each of them to introduce themselves, and I'm certain that they will be willing to answer some of the education-related questions that come from the audience. So just a heads up on that. As always, once we get to the discussion portion, if you have a question or a comment, please do feel free to put a question mark in the chat so we're not speaking over each other. I'll call on you and you can go ahead and unmute and share your question or comment. If you have any questions or comments that are sensitive in nature at all, feel free to use the direct message function in the Zoom meeting. You can send me a message. I'll share the content of the question or the comment without associating it with you personally. All right. The first thing I'll start off with is I'm dropping in the chat the Race to Equity Rock County Addressing Disparities to Build a Foundation for Racial Equity. This is the full report. So if you haven't had a chance to read the report, really dig into it, I'm hoping you'll take a few minutes. It'll take longer than a few minutes, but you'll take some time out of your schedule to do that. I'm going to share my screen so we can begin with the presentation. All right. So this is the cover page to the report. As I stated, it's Race to Equity, specifically targeted on Rock County, which I'm so excited about. And the focus is addressing disparities to build a foundation of racial equity. I had the pleasure of working with Kids Forward on this report. They were tasked with getting the data for the report, and I was tasked with community engagement. So we have the stories behind the data and really that grassroots content to go with the numbers. The appendix of the report are very robust. So all of the graphics, charts, and data is sourced. So feel free to spend some time towards the end of the report if you have any questions of where specific data points are coming from. So the report overviews health, economic well-being, education, and deepened systems. For this discussion, we will be centering solely on education. For upcoming Lunch and Learns, as I mentioned, we will be digging into health, economic well-being, and deepened systems separately. So please look for those and register and join us for those conversations as well. The methodology of the report, I wanted to point out that data from this report came from a number of sources, primarily publicly available data from government sources such as the US Census and various Wisconsin state agencies such as DPI, the Department of Public Instruction. So where available, data for specific racial and ethnic groups are presented individually or disaggregated. How race and ethnicity is defined for each indicator is controlled by each data source and couldn't be standardized for the report. So I did want to point that out. Details and definitions of racial and ethnic groups for each indicator are outlined in the footnotes. So we'll begin with a snapshot of Rock County demographics, specifically focused on the population of people of color across our county and the population of children of color. So you can see that both of those numbers are increasing. If we look at the time period from 2000 to the most recent data, which covers the period between 2015 and 2019, we can see that people of color in the county has grown from 10.7% to 17.2%. And when we drill down and specifically look at children of color, the number has grown from 16% to 28.7%. So education, I'll read this only because I'm not sure what devices you're using to join us and how well you can see the screen. So racial disparities in education have been identified as an area of concern in Wisconsin over the years. When examining the circumstances in Rock County, educational outcomes vary widely by race, and we'll dig into that here. So the next graph, we're looking at students of color in Rock County. So percentage of students of color, when we look at Beloit, our students of color make up 65.9% of our total student population. Janesville, 29.1%, so just about a third. Beloit Turner, 22.9%. Edgerton, 14.3%, and Milton, 10.3%. So the first area we'll delve into, and just to give you a heads up, we're going to center our presentation and discussion around out-of-school suspension rates, non-proficiency rates in reading and math. And I'll explain that further when we get to those slides, college completion, and then we'll end the presentation with looking at mental health. So for the 2019-2020, which is the most recent data available, our out-of-school suspension rates, and this is per 1,000 students. One thing that I do want to point out is that the data is not disaggregated by individual student. So what that means is that one student could account for one or multiple suspensions. So just so we're clear. So per 1,000 students, you can see the data, and we just picked our larger school districts with diverse populations because we didn't want to get into areas where we were potentially identifying students, okay? So that's why you see Beloit, Beloit Turner, and Janesville focused, and then we have the Wisconsin averages to compare those against. And I have the data organized, the same data slightly differently. In the next couple slides, you'll see that. So hopefully one of these data sets, the way it's presented, will really be clear for you to understand. So per 1,000 students, if we look at Beloit briefly, we'll see that per 1,000 students, 626.1 suspensions happened with our Black students. For our Latino students, 146.4. For our multiracial student, that number jumps to 552. And then for our white students, 270. So here are the numbers disaggregated by race. And again, I have it presented a couple different ways. So another way to look at that same data set, the Wisconsin average is at the top, followed by Janesville, Beloit Turner, and Beloit. So if you are a Black student in the Janesville school district, you are 4.5 times higher than your white counterpart to experience an out-of-school suspension. This is just looking at the data. If you identify as a multiracial student, the data shows that you are 2.1% or 2.1 times higher than your white counterparts to experience an out-of-school suspension. So another thing to point out is this does not include time out of the classroom because of an office referral, because of an intervention, which would pull you out of a classroom, or it does not address in-school suspension. So this is solely out-of-school suspension out of the building. In Beloit Turner, Black students are 4 times higher than white students to experience out-of-school suspension. And for Beloit, 2.3 times higher for Black students, 2 times higher for students that identify as multiracial. So when we look at drop in out of school suspension rates. So despite being virtual for part of the school year, the number of out of school suspension rates during the 2019-2020 school year was not much lower compared to previous years in some of our districts. So in the school district of Beloit, out of school suspension rates, it was down for 2019-2020, as you can see, by 3.1%, when the state average was a drop by 28%. So you can see the difference there. And just as a side note, that in the school district of Beloit, out of school suspension rates for students that identified as multiracial actually increased during the 2019-2020 school year by 24.3%, while dropping slightly for all other racial and ethnic groups. So as you can see, the statewide 28% fewer out of school suspensions were recorded in the 2019-2020 school year as compared to the most recent previous year, which would be the 2018-2019 school year. So this is when we shift gears and talk about non-proficiency rates, okay? So these are students that are not proficient in reading, and then in a couple minutes, we'll look specifically at math. So these are the fourth grade check-ins, and I have the same data organized two different ways. So hopefully one of those will be very clear for you. So as we see the color differentiations, the first line, the top line is our Black students, that middle line is our Latino students, and then the bottom line are our white students. So you'll see the most recent data, if you follow me all the way over to the right side, is for the 2018-2019 school year. So what this chart is telling us is that for our Black students, 86.2% of them in fourth grade are not proficient in reading. For our Latino students, and this is the fourth grade check-in, 71% of our Latino students in Rock County are not proficient in reading. And for our white students, fourth grade check-in again, and this is countywide, 55.1% of our students are not proficient in reading. The numbers are horrible for our white students, and it only gets worse once we disaggregate out by race and look at our Latino students and our Black students. So this is our not proficient in math. So before we were looking at reading, if we shift to math, I'll let the numbers speak for themselves. Again, it's organized that top line are our Black students, middle line are Latino students, bottom line are white students. So our most recent data, which would be from 2018-2019, and again, this is countywide, when we look at proficiency rates in math, 94.9% of our Black students in 8th grade are not proficient in math. For our Latino students, it's 84.8% who are not proficient. And I emphasize not proficient because when I've done these presentations before, I received emails afterwards from people saying I delved into the report and I was reading it as proficient. So again, these are our students that are not proficient in these areas. For our white students in math at the 8th grade check-in, 65.6% of our white students are not proficient in math. So the next slide just presents the information in a slightly different way, which sheds light on something that I found is interesting. So we have it organized on the far left side by racial and ethnic identity. So let's just look at our Black students. So the farthest we went back with the data pool was the 2011-2012 school year, and we did that across the board. So for our Black students, you can see, and let's just start by looking at not proficient in reading. Back at the 2011-2012 school year, that number was 91.1%. I can't even process that. 91.1% in the 2011-2012 school year of our Black students. And again, in 4th grade, we're not proficient in math. So if we look at our most recent data, that number is coming down. And if you'll take a look, that number, the non-proficiency rate in reading is coming down for our Black students, our Latino students, and our white students. So that's great. The numbers are still way too high, but something is happening to move us in the right direction, if that's any consolation. When we look down to the bottom half of the chart, we'll see that for our Black students, 83.1%, and that's in the 2011-2012 school year, were reported as not proficient in math at that 8th grade check-in. Now that number has increased when we scroll over to the 2018-2019 data to 94.9%. And unfortunately, across the groups that we are tracking, so Black, Latino, and our white students, all of those numbers have increased. So you'll see that our Latino students in the 2011-2012 school year, just looking at math non-proficiency, that rate has gone from 78.4% to 84.8%. And for our white students, the 2011-2012 check-in, 54.2% to 65.6%. And I know districts are putting a lot of focus on literacy, which I think is fantastic. And that may attribute to why you see those numbers that, again, are still way too high, but they are decreasing from the numbers that we have from the 2011-2012 school year. So I would be interested if any of our superintendents, or if we have any educators on the line once we open the discussion portion, are there those same pushes in math that are happening and we're just still not seeing the results as those pushes for literacy are happening? All right, so as we move forward, the next data set that we'll look at is college completion. And what I do want to be very transparent about is this is a really great report, but we don't have data on everything. So one of the hopes of this report is that our communities across Rock County will use this report as a starting point to use this in the planning processes for the data that we do have. How can we collectively work together to mitigate and eliminate the disparities that we see in race, but also use this data and do data collection of your own, and this is a great opportunity. So what we have highlighted in the report, and this is across Rock County college completion, but as many of you know, a lot of our schools are focused on not only college ready, but college and career ready. So that's technical, that's trade. So lots of other areas that are critically important when we look at what is going to allow our students to have a sustainable lifestyle for themselves. So just specifically looking at college completion in Rock County, for all Rock County residents, we are at 22.1% have completed some form of college, whether that's a technical 2-year program or a traditional 4-year college education. For our white students, slightly better than average at 23.3%. For our Black students, for our Black residents, 13% in Rock County, and for our Latino residents, 9.1%. But again, this is another area where we can focus on college and career readiness. And I would be interested in seeing a study of what percentage of our residents are have completed college or have completed a career set up program that allows them to make a livable wage in our county. So an area for growth and further data collection. So next we're going to look at the education recommendation. There are 2 slides and I have some notes here to kind of expand on them. And this is not an exhaustive list, so please do refer to the original report for additional education recommendations. And one thing that I'm really proud of is that we do provide recommendations for each of the 4 areas that we address in the report. So specifically when we're looking at education, we are recommending an expansion of the Janesville Mobilizing for Change Handle with Care program to make it countywide. For those of you that are not familiar with the program, Janesville Mobilizing for Change is a state certified prevention agency who focuses on reducing substance use and promoting mental wellness. The Handle with Care program specifically is a collaboration between law enforcement and school districts that gives a heads up when a child or adolescent is involved in a potentially traumatic event. So no details are shared. I want to be clear about that, definitely respecting privacy, but school staff are alerted so that they can give the child proper patience and support should any behavioral issues arise. So very important program that I would love to see expanded countywide. Our school districts must intensify their commitment and actions to diversifying the administration, teaching, and support workforce to reflect the diversity in buildings and in our county. Please reflect back to that county demographic slide that we started with. We can see that the person of color percentage in our county is continuing to grow year over year. The county districts should further deepen the priority to place on early grade interventions and strategies that increase the percentage of students of color who demonstrate grade level reading and math proficiency. So as we move forward to our second and final slide of recommendations, we recommend that county school systems and community organizations extend attendance monitoring, mentoring and tutoring and counseling to support those students that are at greater risk for not meeting academic success benchmarks. Specifically, our SAPAR students, which if you're not familiar, SAPAR stands for school age parenting students, and also our students who are eligible for McKinney-Vento services. We further recommend that county schools adopt and expand effective behavioral and classroom school management practices that significantly reduce the reliance on out-of-school suspensions as a conduct management response. And then our final response that I'll highlight today, but definitely not an exhaustive list. Again, please refer to the complete report for that. Our county school system should increase their investment in teacher training and supports aimed at enhancing the teacher core overall effectiveness in supporting students of color to meet high standards and learning goals. So I will stop sharing. I'm actually going to, all right. I was just checking to see if one of our guests is available to join us, and I see that she is. So I am so excited to share the floor with Lindsay Stevens. She is the director of NAMI Rock County. And as I said in my opening, all of us either directly or indirectly have been impacted, unfortunately, by COVID-19, and our schools have not been immune. So we want to definitely share the floor with Lindsay, and she is going to talk about youth-centered services that are available. And hopefully, I know that we do have at least a couple superintendents on the call, can make some connections during this meeting so we can amplify the work that NAMI is doing. So Lindsay, please unmute yourself, introduce yourself to the group, and do share your youth-centered work. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for welcoming NAMI to the meeting today so we can share some of our efforts. With COVID, we had decided that we had identified through conversations and meetings that there has been a strong need for some services around mental health in our youth population here in Rock County. Historically, we had focused primarily on adult services. So we decided we were going to expand and provide some presentations and just things with high schools, elementary schools. We both have presentations for those grades, and then we are working on a presentation for our middle-aged school. But we have a presentation called Ending the Silence. It's a signature program. So for those of you that are not familiar with how NAMI is structured, we are a nationwide organization. We have a national office, and then we have a state office, and then us local affiliates that cover either county or regions. So our office covers all of Rock County. The Ending the Silence is nationally recognized NAMI signature program. So that is a program that, or a presentation, I should say, that brings in two presenters. One is a young adult presenter that shares their story, and the other presenter shares some information and basic information and just a few statistics on the prevalence of mental health challenges in youth, so youth know that they're not alone in their challenges. It can range, the presentation, we try to work with what time we're allowed. It has to be at least 45 minutes, but we can take it up to an hour or a little more, just depending on what the needs and the time restrictions are that we have. So we have done that. We did that at Rock River Charter, and we have been to down in Beloit. Oh my gosh, Ashanti, I know she's on the call. Fresh Start, sorry, Fresh Start. So we have presented twice there, and it gets really good feedback. It is a good conversation starter for some of these youth. When we went to Fresh Start, we broke the students up into two groups. And so one of the groups was in the presentation, and then Ashanti and I had just kind of an open-ended conversation, Q&A session with the other group of kids. And, one of the students was very appreciative because they felt that they haven't been able to have that type of conversation around mental health challenges. So just through the evaluations that we do after the presentation and through conversations, feedback that school staff are getting after the presentations, we know that that students are appreciating that presentation. So that's one of the things that we're doing. Also in high schools, we have an opportunity to do the Raise Your Voice Club. And that is a club that is overseen by an adult, typically maybe a school counselor or school psychologist, whatever the roles are in the different schools. We have a group in Milton High School right now that has been doing the Raise Your Voice Club. They're on their third year. So we had opened it up to invited all of the high schools in Rock County to a listening session, a community forum to learn more about the Raise Your Voice Club. But it's overseen by this adult, whoever's chosen by the school, and then the students really run the club and decide what the club is going to do. It is intended to raise awareness in the school. They can do different projects. We had one of the groups they did Post-it notes around the school with positive messages. They might have small awareness events. They did a kickball tournament to raise funds so they could purchase things for their club. And all of it is around mental health awareness. There have been clubs in Madison that have raised money to bring in speakers for their class. The opportunities are endless. And if anybody is interested in hearing more, they can always reach out to me about any of the programs, and then I can go into further details about those. But again, that's the Raise Your Voice Club. It is for high school students. We also have a presentation for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders that is called Mental Health Chat. It is a really cute presentation for those kiddos about mental health. We use stick figures and reference books and that sort of thing. So it's really honed in on their level. And we just got trained in that. We have not presented that yet, but we have we have reached out to all of the elementary schools in Rock County to offer that presentation. We're really excited to get that going. So again, I can provide more information on that. But with the middle school, we haven't developed a set presentation. We have presented to middle-aged school kids, but right now we are working on formalizing a presentation that can be, offered to several middle-aged schools or middle-aged students, middle school aged students throughout Rock County. So that's what we have been working on. We are also working on implementing a youth group here at NAMI. So we do, for adults, we have 3 different support groups. So we want to implement something. We get a lot of calls from not only providers, but parents that are looking for some type of group for their child to attend, whether we don't really want it to be called a support group. We are asking youth that we have had conversations with through our presentations on feedback of what they would like to see with this group, things that would interest them, topics of conversation, because we want it to be just an open, safe, confidential, friendly environment for them to be around peers that are also living with mental health challenges that can, we can, work on different coping skills, and sometimes their confidence or self-esteem or social skills, they want to improve that because of anxieties and that sort of thing. They don't feel as comfortable being in social settings. So there's a lot of different things that we have that we want to work on with these kiddos in this group. So that is something else that we have in the works right now. We are able to just do customized presentations too. So if there are interest for certain youth groups, we have a lot of community partners that are willing to present with us. We also do training for staff. So there's an agency in Rock County that works with youth. They partner with Rock County Human Services, and they provide services to youth in human services programs. And it's like a mentoring and a respite type program. And their staff was looking for additional training to help them serve their kiddos better and have a better understanding and increase their knowledge base. So we did 2 days of training with them. Again, bringing in community partners, working with community partners in addition to the presentations that we offer. So yeah, so I think that's, as far as youth focused, that's what we've got going on. I'm open to any questions that anybody might have.
Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us and providing that important component, especially as we look at concerns facing education in Rock County. I am just going to place in the chat as a reminder the topics that we've covered. So out of school suspension rates, non-proficiency rates in both reading and math, college completion, and then mental health as it affects our students. Before I open the floor for discussion, we are so excited to have 3 superintendents joining us. So in no particular order, I will just announce the school district, and if that district administrator could just jump on and introduce yourself, and hopefully you are willing. Please feel free as questions come up, if there are specific things that your district is working on, please do feel free to share. Again, we're so excited you could join us. I know that everyone has very busy schedules. So we will start with the Evansville Community School District. Wonderful woman that I've had the good fortune of working some with. So Lori, please go ahead and unmute and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lori Burgos. I'm the new district administrator in Evansville. Happy to be joining and listening in today. So this is my new gig. I came from the Verona area school district, so it's nice to have some background information about Rock County, as over the past 6 months I'm becoming more familiar. Sadly, a lot of the trends that I just saw are familiar to me. And I can tell you that in Evansville, in terms of the question you posed, Amy, about literacy and math work, there was probably an 7 or 8 year very intentional focus around literacy instruction, literacy practices, making sure that staff had sufficient resources, using a very similar framework for reading and writing workshops, diversifying book selections that we're putting in front of our students. And we've seen positive results in literacy trends over time. I would say starting last year, which was a hard year to start this, and for sure this year, we have more of an intensified focus on math. K-12, K through 5, I would say that work started 2 years ago, but 6 through 12, a lot of intentionality around changing our math practices, really investigating pedagogy and providing coaching support for our teachers. So that's a little bit about what's going on in Evansville. And because I'm new, there's always new opportunities to, just learn about the system and really talk about conversations of, we're trying to build some common language around what we mean when we say equity in Evansville.
Lori, thank you so much. Very excited always to hear from you. Next, we are joined by our superintendent from Beloit Turner.
Hi, Dennis McCarthy. In my 15th year here at Beloit Turner as superintendent, I think, just looking at the topics, I kind of made a list of things that I think about in terms of our efforts. The first thing in terms of student discipline, we first measure discipline in actual rates of suspension and the amount of suspensions that are going on in our schools, because we talk about the overuse of suspension as a tool. And I'm very pleased that we keep those suspension rates extremely low. I'm very well aware of who the students are, what the offenses actually are, and how those numbers play out. There are not many reasons why a student should have to be sent home to take them out of school. So that's one of the first measurements. And I think one of the ways that we've gotten at some of those issues is by really taking a deeper dive into restorative practices, restorative circles, adding behavioral interventionists, adding kind of safe places within the district where we don't take discipline to the office. The office can kind of be a place where students escalate at times, because it is a different environment. And in some cases, those are not effective ways to get at the disciplinary issues that are happening there. So there's a lot of things that I think happen within classrooms to get at the issues. And I would also say, I don't see a lot of out of school suspensions coming from actual classroom behaviors. That's not where we tend to see these issues happen. They tend to be out of classrooms, AODA issues, those kinds of things that are happening. And those are issues we have to get at also. I think one of the most effective things that we've done in terms of not only reducing suspensions, but reducing expulsions is through the use of behavior contracts. And those behavior contracts, which are worked on with parents, students, often involve counseling services, positive growth incentives that are built in to the contracts. So students have measures that they know what they're looking for and how they earn their way back to having full trust within a system, because it's often a trust breakdown that is resulting in some of the issues that we see. Those have been highly effective as a whole. The on-site counseling services that we've been providing for the last few years, where we're bringing in 2 organizations to really do the outside counseling right here in schools. And because I think that's a real issue, whether it's the mental health issues that we're seeing, social media issues, there's a lot of that type of stuff going on. And kids struggling with how to communicate with each other. And by having besides our own school services that we work with, the outside counseling services that are very necessary. In the past, where we'd work with parents, in some cases who would say, well, I don't have access, or I can't take off work to take them to counseling. And that counseling happens here in the school environment with those outside services that are provided in a way that families can afford the services, I think is huge, because too many students aren't getting the access that they need for the services that are needed based on where they're at. I think a few other things that I think about from a strategic planning standpoint, what we do with districts and getting the board kind of to have a plan that actually means we look at data in a meaningful way and we don't cherry pick data. I think sometimes we're guilty of cherry picking data and saying, here's what success looks like because we decided to define it this way, versus for us, it's an alignment to the redefining ready nationalized criteria. And I think that's super, super critical. And that gets into some of the test scores that we talk about, because I think too often we get way too laser focused on talking about test scores and test scores only as a definition of a child. And I think there's way, way more to a child in terms of defining them that should really focus on growth. And where we know some kids struggle throughout their time, we want to define what growth looks like, but beyond the test scores, because quite frankly, I think we are probably also guilty of over testing kids in many ways. And when we define the criteria of what success looks like beyond test criteria, and we start to look at what are true college, career, and life readiness indicators, and then we focus in on what that means at the high school, what it means at the middle school, what that means at the elementary schools, then we can disaggregate data in a better way that really tells us from those groups, where are we underperforming and what do we need to do to help support students in those areas. So Lori mentioned curricular changes. We've implemented major changes in our math and ELA curricula, but along with that comes a lot of training that's needed for staff. And reading would be one of those areas where we're diving now more into the science of reading and what that really means at the lower grade levels, and that's going to be a process. In general, I would say those are some of the things that I look at. I do, one of the caveats when we look at some of the older test data is a lot of that, there were changes in the years that you were showing from WKC to Badger to Forward, 3 different test formats that were used. And we all, educationally, we know what the Badger bump is. So sometimes when we look at that data, it can be a little bit skewed in how we look at that as a whole. But overall, while I think some of the test data is important, I want to really emphasize, I think, the importance of defining what readiness looks like for a child so every child sees success and isn't simply measured by a test score.
So Dennis, I think I know you well enough that you'll be okay with me putting you on the spot a little bit. So in 30 seconds or less, I have a question. And I get the switches in test and focusing on test and what does that really mean for a child's success. But when we are measuring reading and we are measuring the ability to comprehend and do math operations, are you saying that the non-proficiency numbers that we have in reading and in math are not or may not be a true reflection of if that child is proficient at grade level in reading and just in math generally?
I think there's a potential certainly that the scores are indicators based on that measurement, but we also see kids that can be highly successful when they're not sitting in front of a computer screen taking a test. And that's what a lot of the tests are. So it can be difficult to measure that. I think in some ways we're a little, and I can go back to the movements that got us to where we're at, but we are so test heavy focused. I'm not saying it's not important to have measurements in time, but I'm way more interested if we're going to do testing, what does it look like within our classroom settings? And how do we measure progress of a child? And can we set a goal for a child that shows growth during that time? And I look at that with state report cards, for example. We try to compare districts that way through these measures, which are cherry picking certain data, and that report card keeps changing over and over and over again to the point where, it's, I'm not going to get in. There are a lot of things on that I think we have to go beyond if we're really going to talk about what success looks like for a kid. I'm not saying these scores aren't important, but I think we're very guilty of shortchanging kids if all we do is talk about measurement of the test.
Appreciate that, Dennis. You bring up some important points. And again, thank you for being here. Last but definitely not least, we have our superintendent for the school district of Beloit. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Keiser, superintendent for the school district of Beloit. I'm in my second year here in the district, my first year in the permanent role, and appreciate the report and highlighting where we are, because if we don't understand our past, we can't write a new narrative for the future. And addressing some of the bullet points that have been highlighted here. When it comes to out of school suspension rates, one of the things that we recognize is the disparity in how our code of conduct is being assessed, not only across our district, but across our student population. And so using some of our early intervening funds that come through special education, we've actually created a coordinator position to help do two things. One, to be a coach and calibrator across our system so that when we talk about behaviors that we are all saying the same thing. So we oftentimes use the educational jargon of inter-rater reliability. So if two people look at the same event, they both see the same thing and not see two different things. This also is a person who works with each of our schools around our social emotional supports. So our second step in our 7 mindsets, social emotional curriculum, they act as a liaison to help support schools in bringing that curriculum to life within each of the schools and support the principals and the teachers in helping that make a difference in our students. Because as much as we talk about academics, we can't talk about academics separate from social emotional learning. They are one and the same, and we need to be dealing with both equally. Along with that, we've been using some of our federal dollars in the ESSER funds to build partnerships with our community partners to meet the needs of our students. So in part, some of that has been to supplement our coaching position that works with our McKinney-Vento students and homeless students so that we can help support them on and get them on track to graduation. And not just graduation, but beyond graduation, where that is in the careers or into post-secondary education. So I'm happy that we were able to use some of those funds to expand that, but also with our partners within the city of Beloit, we've been able to partner with not only the YWCA and Boys and Girls Club and Community Action, but we're also partnering with Rising Queens and Filling the Void, where they're bringing their educators into our schools at the high school during the lunch hour and being able to do Luncheon Learns and meeting the students right where they are in the school day. So if we can intervene before something happens, we'll be able to have our students stay focused on the academics and be able to have those tools and supports. And that then comes across after school, where we have these same organizations providing after school supports, both social emotional learning, some homework help, as well as some career and life skills. When it comes to our literacy and our math, we've used our federal dollars recently to overhaul our early literacy. So K-5, we've invested in the American Reading Company curricular resources, much more diverse curricular resources that come both in English and authentic Spanish, and have embedded curricular assessments. So to Dennis's comment about over assessing our students, we want to make sure that we have curricular aligned assessments so that we don't have to do additional assessments for students, but we can track and monitor our students moving forward. And our initial early data is showing some promise. We're going to hope have our fingers crossed and knock on wood that our winter maps show that those trends are moving in the right direction. One thing that we are pushing on our partner curricular resource partners is to make sure that we get all of our reports disaggregated by race and ethnicity so that we can report those out and see truly where our lighthouses are, where our bright spots are. But not to diminish the work in math, we recognized last year that math was a challenge for us. And so we've been fortunate to leverage the skill of our math teachers to redesign a summer school intervention program that has now flowed into this school year. And we are in the process of launching the same curricular resource pilots in the area of mathematics. So we look to take a hard look at our materials that we're using to teach mathematics and ensure that we have the best materials in our teachers' hands to help address that. One thing that I will note is that despite us being virtual for 3 terms last year, in looking at our data, it's not good that our data went down, but our Black students actually held steady. They actually didn't go up or down, and they're the only subgroup population that showed that. So if we can help build some supports and interventions, we can move that trend in the upward direction. And then as far as college and career readiness, we continue to partner with Beloit College and BTC to provide opportunities for industry certifications and dual credit options so that we can provide students that opportunity while they are in high school.
Dan, thank you so much for those robust remarks. Much appreciated. We are joined by one other superintendent on the call, School District of Milton. Please go ahead and unmute and introduce yourself. And with our remaining 8 minutes or so, I'm going to open the floor to questions. So if you are a member of our audience and you have a question, again, for out of school suspension rates, non-proficiency rates in reading and or math, the college completion information or mental health, please get those questions ready, and we're going to use our time efficiently to get through as many of those as possible.
Thanks, Amy. And I want to start by thanking the YWCA and Amy for putting this opportunity together. It's a great chance for us to put some brains together and both look at the issues that are out there and identify some potential solutions. And thanks to Lindsay for the NAMI information. A couple things that have been happening in Milton, and I'll be brief on this so that we have some time for questions. We are updating our English language arts curriculum to make it more topical. We've in the past couple years, we have updated our classroom libraries in all of our elementary school classrooms with a goal not only of having more up-to-date information available in those classroom libraries, but also more diverse set of authors and topic areas. We are in the middle of doing some training throughout this year with our full administrative team and some staff members on equity and what that means for our school district. We're using some of our federal ESSER funds to implement both restorative practices and responsive classrooms and tying those things into training for our administrators on options to suspension for students and with a goal of keeping students in classrooms. And then the main thing that we're doing is just making sure that our staff and administrators have a mindset of being able to identify and meet the individual needs of all learners and all groups, and not being satisfied that some students are doing well or that certain groups are doing well, but being alert to making sure that every individual student knows that we are working to identify the needs that they have and meet those needs that they have.
Thank you so much. So we're going to officially open for discussion. I'm so excited to get this conversation posted on our YouTube channel because I think there's been a lot of information that has been shared. And I'm going to go ahead and speak for our superintendents. I don't think that they would mind if there's something that you want more information on, you reaching out to them, and they will either respond to you or direct you to the specific personnel in their district that can help get questions answered. So superintendents, thank you in advance for that. If there are questions on any of the topics specific to education that we've covered, it seems like we never have enough time, but we do have a few minutes. Please go ahead and put a question mark in the chat, and we will get those addressed. Angela Lynch did put in the chat that she can answer questions that are specific for the school district of Janesville. So thank you, Angela, for doing that. So I'm going to pause. If you do have a question, please put a question mark in the chat and I will acknowledge you so you can go ahead and unmute and share. All right, so that was my 5-6 second teacher wait time. I have a question. If any of our superintendents would like to speak briefly on what is being done or any progress being made, any innovations in recruiting, my words escaped me for a minute, and recruiting and retaining teachers and administrators of color, that would be of great interest to me.
Amy, so in Beloit, we have an open position for an executive director of HR, and we have partnered with a group out of Chicago called the Alma Advisory Group. And if anyone wants their contact information, just email me. They specialize in recruiting administrators of color, and they work specifically with school districts. So that is exciting. And we're also consulting with them to review our hiring guide to have a critical lens around that. As far as retention, working with our union, we have developed caucuses. And so I work with the Black Caucus. And this is a group of educators who meet with me monthly. And we are in the process of exploring what does retaining educators of color look like here in Beloit from their perspective, so that we can assess and build some new structures here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing those resources. And again, if you believe those resources would be helpful for your district, please do reach out to Dr. Keiser. There is a question in the chat. Can any of the superintendents share how they feel community members could help to reduce the racial disparities in their district? Great question.
I'm trying to give my 5-second wait voice so that I'm not always talking. That's a great question, and it's a complex question. I think part of it is not being afraid to put yourself in uncomfortable spaces, and that means seeking out diverse community events and starting the conversation. Sometimes it's the informal that does the best for breaking down barriers. I'm always open to meet with any groups here in Beloit or in Rock County and start to learn more about Beloit, but then also explore my blind spots and share in lived experiences.
Perfect. Thank you so much for Dan for sharing that. I'll hold a little space if there's another superintendent that would like to respond.
Yeah, this is.
I can add. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
This is Rich and Milton. I'll start and I'll keep it brief so there's time for others too. I think one thing that we're seeing and that came out in the news this week is the legislation or proposed legislation around critical race theory and the discussions that are taking place there. And I think one thing that community members can do is voice support for the importance of schools being able to make decisions about how to address issues of race in their schools and not be tied to restrictions coming down from the state on that topic. Because if the bill that's proposed passes, it will have a significant impact on how districts are able to address issues of race in their schools.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just to be clear, critical race theory is not taught in any of our K-12 schools. And critical race theory is very different than thinking and teaching critically about race. All right, so I am a big proponent of starting and ending on time. I'm going to break my own rule. If everyone on the call could give us 2 to 3 additional minutes, I would be grateful for that. Dennis and Lori, you are appearing on screen, I'm assuming, because you have brief comments. So Dennis, we'll start with you, and then we'll hear from Lori, and then I do have an exciting announcement before we close. Dennis, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share. I think the political agendas that are out there right now, which Rich touched on, are super important. And I think they're also some thoughts we need to really center around as school districts to understand the importance of the work that we do. I wanted to just, I put a link to our strategic plan in there because I touched on that earlier. And when I talk about what it means to define success for a child beyond a test score, pages 4 and 5 really get into some of the details at the board level that we go to in there. And all of those indicators are broken down demographically. And I think that's where a lot of this work starts is, do you own it? And if you're not willing to disseminate the goals that you have and measure them beyond just a whole group look, then you're missing the boat on equity. And because we break this down demographically, each one of our schools and leadership teams are forced to look at data in this way. And that's where the ownership starts. This is also the data that we send to parents. Parents have to see where our schools are at, and it makes them far more aware of what's going on with their children. So there's things like attendance. Okay, attendance is a true career readiness mark. If you don't come to school, you're not going to be successful. And when parents become aware of how they're doing, and demographically we become aware, do we have issues in race, socioeconomic? Do we start to identify things that we can be doing better as a school to target populations that need more help from us and put our resources there? So I give you that as a big picture look into, I think, where a lot of this work starts. If you don't have your goals aligned at the top, you're not going to make progress.
Dennis, thank you so much for that. Lori, we're going to pass the floor to you.
Sure, I'll go back to the question that was posed in the chat about what people can do. And I want to echo what Rich said. In Evansville, we do have a diversity and inclusivity committee. That's through which I met Amy. And I think finding opportunities within your school district, if there are committees and or just forums in the community to engage in these conversations. A month and a half ago or so, an anti-CRT, anti-Common Core, et cetera, speaker came to Evansville and gave a community talk. It was not well attended. However, those types of actions do have impacts on our staff. So something I just want to throw out there is something simple as thanking teachers right now. Kind messages also to administrators aren't a bad thing either, but especially to our teachers. I had a veteran teacher tell me last week on Martin Luther King Day, we had a professional learning day focused on equity and again, some of these building blocks of what we mean when we say that in this district. And had some circles in the afternoon just to process what we had done in the morning. And a veteran teacher who has, it's very common for teachers to talk about Martin Luther King Day or have students engage in some kind of writing or service-oriented project, doubt a lesson plan that was just expertly designed and engaging the kids in critical thinking. She told me that she wasn't sure if she should even teach it this year because she was afraid of the potential pushback she might get from parents who are have bought into this CRT, which again, we don't teach. So that's a real impact that is happening on teachers, even though, I've asked staff, I really want to know what they need from us as administrators to know that we support them teaching accurate history, teaching multiple perspectives, diversifying the books that we put in front of students. So just knowing that that's happening, I think our teachers need a lot of support because we can have our plans and our goals, and at the same time, there's a reality of what they're feeling and what they're afraid to do right now because of the political nature of well, actually, it's fear mongering that's been happening, and sadly, it is working.
So Lori, thank you so much. And what all of these comments and the responses from our superintendents is telling me, and superintendents, please let me know via email if I'm wrong. We might need to do an equity and education discussion and bring up some more of these topics and continue the work of these rich dialogues. I will leave you all with a quote before my announcement. Aaron, I didn't forget, from the late, great James Lowen, telling the truth about the past helps us cause justice in the present, and achieving justice in the present helps us tell the truth about the past. All right. With that being said, I am putting a final drop in the chat. YWCA Rock County is also so proud to work with the diversity action team of Rock County and putting on, we can help with the tech support, the monthly DAT events. And the one coming up in February is February 17th, Silence Speaks, Making Space for Critical Youth and Adult Conversations around Racial Equity and Social Justice. In the spirit of full disclosure, one of the panel members was one of my interns from last summer. She is absolutely brilliant. I'm not sure who else is on the panel, but I am sure that they are equally wonderful. All right, so hopefully you will all join us for that event. The registration link is in the chat. I am so excited that we started, emphasis on started, this discussion. Hopefully we'll find venues through YWCA Rock County to continue this equity in education discussion because there's still so much to discuss. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your day. Thank you for allowing us to go 5 minutes over. I really appreciate it. Everyone do stay well.